writers who have my utmost respect and admiration. So on our panel today we have Dr. Devika Brendon. She has a first-class honours in English literature from the University of Sydney and a PhD from Monash University, specializing in personal and political work of Jonathan Swift, the 18th century political satirist. Besides those impressive work, she has worked as a teacher of English language and literature and as a course creator for English syllabus in multiple colleges. She has also been an editor, reviewer, and a writer of short stories and poetry, which have been published widely internationally in literary journals and anthologies. She is a senior content editor of New Ceylon Writing. She is a columnist for Ceylon Today, The Sunday Island, The Morning, The Sunday Times, and a contributor to LMD and Ground Views. She is currently working on the first of her 3 novels. Dr. Devika Brendon, thank you for joining us and for giving us your time today.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Our next panelist is a Gratian Prize winning author based in Colombo who writes on food, travel, and history. His debut, Travelogue, Upon a Sleepless Isle, won the Gratian Prize in 2020, and he also writes on cricket for one of the largest sports publication, ESPN Cricket Info. Andrew Fidel, thank you for joining us today, and we are excited to hear you share your experiences and advices with all of us.
Thanks for having me, Shamli, and thank you for that introduction.
Yes, Fidel, so can you tell us when did you start writing, and have you always wanted to be a writer?
No, I haven't actually always wanted to be a writer. I didn't, growing up, it didn't really seem like, it wasn't on my radar as something that I could do, for work, professionally. I always, there were always other kind of interests or career paths that seemed kind of more realistic to me, I guess, at the time. There was no one in my family who was a writer. It just didn't seem like a career path. But then I fell into it by just, I guess, like you said earlier about writers just writing because there's something inside them that, they want to express. I used to do that just as a hobby. I wrote for my university magazine, and I just enjoyed the actual process, the kind of the process of writing so much that I just kept doing it on the side. And then eventually, my very first paid job was actually for Cricinfo, which was a site that I grew up reading, and I just randomly sent them some stuff that I'd written for my university magazine, and they liked it, and that was kind of the first time where I realized, look, this is something that I could, get paid to do. And I think I was probably about 19, 20 at the time. So relatively late in kind of life compared to where a lot of other writers.
Thank you so much. That was indeed inspirational. And when you talked about the process of writing, Dr. Devika, can you tell us what motivates and inspires you to write? And do you think that intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation plays an equal part in writing, and should it?
Wow, what a great question. Well, first of all, I'd like to do the second part. Well, intrinsic motivation is really about self-expression and making sense of the world as we experience it. And it's really about, to me, it's about, cultivating an inner life, which is really important. And that kind of connects with the second part, which is, yes, we're stimulated and prompted by what goes on around us, but sometimes what's happening is horrific, as is indeed currently the case in the world. And this is where being a writer can help us make sense of things. It can give us an opportunity to step back, maybe even into the past through our memory, or into the future through imagination. And we can, in a lot of creative ways, we can position ourselves in relation to what's happening in a way that can help us navigate. It is really quite personal. Of course, extrinsic prompts include, writing, for competitions and for prizes and awards and things like that. But most serious writers, I think, are continuing to write no matter what. They get up early in the morning or stay up late at night. They try to fit it in no matter what is happening in their lives. And the prizes and the awards and the competitions are just kind of like an extra sort of thing. And most people tend to have a few manuscripts on the go, and they will submit whatever they're doing at the time, and probably apply for maybe 50 to 100 things in a year, and probably get published by about 3, something like that. So it's really not about externals. To me, it's really about what you do every day.
Could you also tell us about what motivates you?
Well, what motivates me is really solving problems. Often when I think about my poetry, there's usually something that's on my mind and it's sort of nagging me, and I can't really settle down until I've unraveled it. So the poem becomes a process of, exploring that idea. And I've written short stories as well, which are all about emergence from some sort of tangled situation. I'm currently, as you said in your very detailed introduction, thank you, I'm working on some longer pieces now, and it's quite different. I'm used to kind of short bursts, so sustaining a character arc is quite a challenge, but basically it's about things that have happened in my life, or I've witnessed things and they haven't made sense, and I've wanted to explore them and try to work it out. So that's really what motivates me.
Thank you very much. I think both of you did mention that it's important to enjoy the process of writing, as well as I think we can conclude that intrinsic motivation is a little bit more important than extrinsic motivation. And moving on to inspiration, Fidel, what was it that inspired you to write a travelogue? Did you go on a writing pilgrimage, or was Upon a Sleepless Isle an afterthought?
I did the travel for the purpose of writing a book. I think it was just I've always loved to travel. I always loved the kind of the discovery of new places and the and kind of working out how a place came to be the way it is. And I was reading a lot of travelogues, I think around 2014, and I realized no one at that point had done one on Sri Lanka. And it just felt right to me that I attempt it, and I think the more I started thinking about it, the more I knew I had to do it. It's
and yeah, we do have our guest joining back again. So Fidel, you were telling us about your inspiration to write the travelogue. Can you please tell us more about it?
Yeah, I'll start again, I guess. I was reading a lot of travelogues long before I had the idea to write a travelogue myself. I've always loved travel and the act of kind of exploring and discovering new places. And it was about 2014. I was reading a bunch of travelogues, and I realized no one had done one at the time on Sri Lanka, or there hadn't been one on Sri Lanka for a long time. So that was where the thought first seeded itself in my head, and then the more I thought about it, the more irresistible the idea became. And I guess I'm drawn to writing as a means of exploration, as writing to discover things, not just about the world around you, but about yourself and your reaction, how the way in which both writing and travel change you. Are both ideas that I've always been drawn to, and through the course of the travels, initially the inspiration was other travelogues, travel writing that made me want to visit places, that inspired, that kind of lit a fire of wanting to explore, various parts of the world. That was the initial inspiration. But then, as soon as I began to travel around Sri Lanka, and you find all these things that surprise you, that things happen to you, the way people interact with you, the manner in which the history kind of has shaped the place, and sometimes the history of Sri Lanka is so layered and complex, and so difficult to make sense of, that I felt like the only way I could really make sense of it was to think about it and to write about it. And the process of going through, of processing all of this information in your mind, and trying to simplify it, or trying to produce something that can be that makes sense to someone else. That entire process is also in itself, so satisfying, so rewarding, and just to get, to parse all of the history and to put it down on a page. And I think, I'll just give you a couple of examples. Every time something funny happened, I had to write it down and make a joke of it. And I think the first parts of the books that got written were the jokes, and the rest of the narrative began to fit itself around the jokes. And I think that's probably another aspect of what inspires me. Things that are humorous are, that's something I'm drawn to as a writer. I've always been drawn to as a writer. In fact, my very first pieces that I wrote for my university magazine were satirical ones as well. So I think all of those things, there's not one source of inspiration. All of those things helped bring it together.
Thank you. That sounds very exciting. And from everything that you said, it sounds like writing a travelogue is so much fun. And at any point during the whole writing process of Upon the Sleepless Isle, did you expect to win an award? And how important is this win to you?
I don't want to say. I mean, it's a good validation of work that you've done, but it's also a validation of work you've done in the past. I hope that I'm not the same writer now that wrote that book. I hope that I've progressed from that. But it's not. If it means that more people will pick it up, more people will read it, more people will connect with it and get something out of it. That is the best thing about it. The actual winning of the award, it feels good for a couple of days, but it's a very transitory feeling. It doesn't last very long. And it wasn't something that motivated me either when I was writing the book. If you're writing for awards, I don't even know how you would go about doing that. If you're writing with an award in mind, I think my only goal was to write honestly, to write engagingly, and to write creatively, and bring something to the discussion about Sri Lanka that hadn't been said before, that was original. So those were my goals. The process of winning award, I would say it's not, I think it possibly meant more to other people than it did to me. But it's certainly fantastic. I mean, I think a lot of people, once you see that sticker on the front of I've bought books because they've won awards, and I suspect, or I've read books because they've won awards. I suspect other readers are like that as well. So that is probably the best part about it.
That was an unexpected response, but then again, the fact that you enjoyed the process of writing more than the process of winning an award really motivates and inspires somebody like me. And moving on to Dr. Devika, I do have a question about you, about rituals and practices that you've put together over time that helps you focus on writing. Is there anything that you do? Yeah, sure.
Very much. Yeah. You see, what I found was that unlike Andrew, I wanted to be a writer from quite a young age, and in fact, the subjects that I studied at university were very much building blocks towards that. So I studied psychology, philosophy, and literature. I also studied anthropology and so on in a non-formal way, just so that I could see how the thinking had been on how people live and how they build their lives. That's all been really useful. But in terms of rituals personally, I think that as I've professionally grown, I've been really fortunate in the sense that I've been able to make a living from teaching literature. And so the work that I did to earn money, pay the bills, was absolutely dovetailing with what I love doing and my creative work. So I would teach during the day and write at night. And it was perfect. Really one thing, one part of it supported the other. So that was really great. And that was because in Australia, English is a compulsory subject to study, not like in Sri Lanka. You wouldn't be able to make a full-time living as an English tutor in Sri Lanka because hardly anybody chooses to study English literature or even language, really, if they're given a choice. So basically, that was really good fortune. In terms of rituals, I try to write every day. Sometimes it doesn't work, but basically it involves notebooks and things like that. But it kind of builds, and then it gets to a point where it's like a jug just spilling over. And then when it gets to that point, whatever story I'm writing, or if it's a poem, it's a much shorter process, it just takes over, and I can't do anything else. Like, it's just, I can't concentrate literally on anything else. I have to cancel things until it's finished. It's like a compulsion. It's a little scary, and I'm a bit concerned about the whole novel thing because it's much longer. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it's very exciting. And I also feel that I've been writing straight onto my phone. I haven't been, I've bypassed the note taking now. I just go straight on, and I'm also a columnist. So speaking of external prompts from your previous question, I'm supposed to be writing about current issues and things like that. So there are times when, I'm pondering something maybe for a week or so, and then it'll just burst out. It takes me about 40 minutes flat to write a column of 1,000 words. And then I send it to the editor. And it's quite a cathartic sort of process, really. But anyway, so in terms of rituals, I found as I've got older that I resented the time that was taken up by other things. And I started thinking, well, why am I spending so much time teaching? It's great. I love it. I love helping students achieve their results. But there are things that need to be said. So I started to gradually rearrange my life so that writing became the most important thing and took the biggest priority of time. And I've been a lot happier as a result. In fact, the pandemic has actually helped me do that because everything's online, so you have much greater control over your time. And it's all by Zoom or, Skype or whatever, so you can control it so much better. Also, there's a lot more time to actually spend reading and pondering and reviewing what you've done. I used to be very reactive before because everything was just incoming all the time. And I think a lot of writers feel like this. We're quite private people. And, if there's too much incoming information, it can really derail you. You need to be able to have a lot of time to think things through. And when things have shut down, it's terrible in a lot of ways economically for people. But for a writer, it's like it's given us the time and the space to be able to organize our lives to prioritize writing.
Thank you for that insight. And 40 minutes flat for 1,000 words.
Yeah,
that's something I'm putting on my bucket list right now. And I've been told a lot of times that editing is a huge part of writing.
Oh, yeah.
How important would you consider editing to be? And are there any tips that writers could follow in order to edit their work successfully?
Well, Absolutely. I started a Sri Lankan editors forum a couple of years ago on Facebook. We've got more than 150 members now, which is really great. And the idea was to discuss and work out best practice for editors, because a lot of people are asked to edit people's work, and I don't think many writers in Sri Lanka, I mean, Andrew would probably be able to speak to this, but I don't think many writers understand, especially if they're young, the importance of having a second set of eyes and somebody objective to give you feedback on what you've written. Because, you know, it's really important. You won't be able to see the whole picture of what you're doing as clearly as someone who's coming to it fresh. And often as writers, we tend to justify, you know, things that we've done instead of being more rigorous in our criticism of ourselves, you know. So the thing is to find someone you trust, and that trust will develop, right? Or maybe you start with someone you respect, and you work it out with them. A lot of writers, honestly, they feel they can't afford a professional editing job in Sri Lanka. But my experience is, if an editor wants to work with you, they will negotiate. And they'll do it because they want to assist you to write the best work that you can. So the trust develops, and ideally you would be able to you know, give them 2 or 3 sample chapters of what you've done or a section of your work, and they'd be able to come back to you with a quote, and you'd be able to work with them, you know, very pleasantly and get a great outcome. I want to say that I'm a really passionate editor. I feel that editing can transform a good work into a great work. And it requires humility on the part of the writer. I'm really, again, fortunate because I've had some excellent editors in my life, and they're willing to take the time and give the attention. That's really hard, but they do it. And that's also inspired me to be like that myself when I'm working with writers. It's very important because an editor needs a lot of patience as well as skill. And the writer themselves has to, you know, be, what's the word? Not humble, because I hate that word. They have to be open enough to look again at what they've done and not be defensive when somebody is making a suggestion. So you have to, as an editor, you've got to take the time to really understand what the writer is trying to do and not rush in there and impose your views, you know. That's really important as well. You're assisting them, that's all. You're basically, you know, a secondary person. It's their work, it's their ideas, and it's, you know, the great thing about Google Docs editing is that you can do it as a suggestion and they can accept it or reject it, and it's up to them. I like that because it empowers the writer, which is really important when you're developing a relationship of trust.
I like how you define the relationship between an editor and a writer in a way that sounded more like both of them are two sides of a coin, and both of them need their space, and both of them need to respect and trust each other.
Definitely.
And moving on to Fidel, I want to ask you if you believe in a block, and if you do, how do you overcome it?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat it? Hello?
So I asked you if you do believe in a writer's block. If you do believe, how do you overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question because I mean, like in my day job, I'm a reporter and a journalist most of the time. And in that job, you're not allowed to have writer's block. You know, you can't, someone sent you on a tour to go and cover and spending money for you to stay in a hotel somewhere, you have to turn out some copy that day. You can't just call back and say, hey, I have writer's block today, there's nothing coming from me. It's just not. So I guess in that job, you figure out how to overcome it. Sometimes you end up filing something that you're not particularly proud of, but that's the job. And I think that's been really helpful to me. I haven't had kind of the long, debilitating periods of writer's block that some writers talk about because of my journalism and reporting background, where you know how to get words onto a page, and you might not be particularly happy with the way the words are coming out on the page, but at least you've got something there. And the most heartbreaking thing about writing, I think a lot of writers will talk about this, is that blank page where you've got absolutely nothing there. But if you can figure out a way, there might be some idea. The thing that I think about when I'm struggling with a piece is, what am I most excited about writing? Writing about in this piece, is there one idea that I'm really, really passionate about, that I think hasn't been stated this way, that hasn't been thought about this way, hasn't had this particular lens applied to it, and then I get that first sentence. It might be something that comes at the end of the piece eventually, or it might be something that comes at the start of the story, or in the middle somewhere, but something. Sometimes when I'm writing a long form piece, it's a scene where I observed something and I can write descriptively about it for 150 words, 200 words, nothing huge, but just getting those first 150, 200 words on the page seems like half the battle is won. So I think everyone has off days. There are lots of weeks where I have a very, very low kind of productivity, but then at the same time, if you've been doing it for long enough, you know that there are other weeks that'll come that you'll be writing thousands and thousands of words a day and doing it like pretty effortlessly. So I think when you've overcome it enough times, at least like touch wood, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not that far into my writing life, I think, but I think when you've overcome it enough times, or you have ways to trick your mind into to believing that you've done some work. I also wanted to quickly add on to something. There was a fascinating conversation about editing that you and Dr. Devika had earlier. I just wanted to add one thing. I think the most productive editing relationships I've had were ones where I could fight with the editor, and I think that is, as Dr. Devika said, things that it's a relationship that develops over time, and you trust each other more and more. But the more angry our emails are towards each other, and like the more that's actually kind of a sign, at least in my life, of a really good editing relationship, because we can be really straight and really curt with each other, because both of us want the piece to get better. I think once you know that the other person is working solely for the benefit of whatever you're trying to produce together, then the editing relationship kind of is something that's really strong. It's not that we kind of take anything personally, but when we can be very, very blunt about what's not working, what is working, and the writer sometimes it's down to the writer to sometimes fight for the words that they put on the page. That I think is, at least for me, has been the best. That relationship has produced the best work.
Thank you so much for that interesting perspective. I mean, it's very important that you need to trust and respect each other in a relationship, but then again, fights really make things interesting as well as make the bond strong. I think I would add to that, but talking about the writer's block, Dr. Devika, can you tell us if joining a writing community would help aspiring writers, or would it help in terms of not having a writer's block, or getting over a writer's block?
Definitely. I would strongly recommend to any writer, especially an emerging one, to find a writing group that you can really relate to and whose work you respect, and start collaborating with them, working with them. Especially now with Zoom. We used to meet physically, and we can't now. So that's kind of opened it up to international groups and things like that, which is really unexpected and great. So I'm actually a member of a group which wakes up every Friday morning at 6:10 in Sydney, which is something like 1:40 in the morning for me, which is really hard, on Friday. It's called Sunrise Poetry, and they used to meet physically, but now they're meeting on Zoom, and they write to a prompt every Friday, and it's wonderful. That regular practice and collaborative practice is just gold. And you can actually join groups like that. It doesn't have to be only in Sri Lanka. It can be everywhere, all over the world. And they have performance, poets, and you listen, and gradually, you get invited to speak, and it's a real give and take, and it's beautiful. And being part of a community like that can be incredibly motivating. Because, after the session is over, people sit and chat and they complain and whinge a lot, about how bloody horrible their life has been lately and whatever. And you can see that there's tremendous camaraderie and support, because ultimately everyone's work is improving all the time. And there's a lot of genuine encouragement going on. So yes, I would strongly recommend that. And I would also, can I just say, I don't know if you're going to ask about this later, but one of the great ways we can support each other as writers is to review each other. And I don't mean just sort of a few lines on Goodreads or whatever. And I don't mean just reviewing your friends. I mean actually taking the time to read something thoroughly and giving quite a detailed response, because that is wonderful for a writer to have a thoughtful response to what they've done and a summing up of their achievement. And I've heard from some major publishing houses that a detailed review is really fantastic for a writer, because most people assume that short reviews are just written by friends. And I think it's important to have an objective opinion about your work, and it's really hard to get at first, but I personally try to review as many people as I can. It's been really difficult lately, but I'm starting to starting to work through my reviewing list again. I love reviewing poetry. I love reviewing novels. And I think it's a really generous thing you can do to another writer, because it's your response to them, and this is something that is beyond marketing, it's very personal in a way. I mean, I've had poets say to me, it's just so amazing to be understood and to have somebody, speak to what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I would strongly recommend that as well. It's very motivating for yourself as a writer. It takes, honestly, it doesn't take anything away from you as a writer to reach out and support others. It's quite the opposite. The more you do it, the more motivated you are, and the more refined your own process becomes, in my experience.
Thank you very much for that insight. And it's only been, I think, 30 to 40 minutes into the conversation, and my bucket list is already growing longer. And Devika, Dr. Devika, I do have a question for you, maybe my last question before I open up the floor to the speakers. How do you define success as a writer, personally?
Well, personally, I would say, and this is sort of going back to what I said at the beginning, personally, it's your form of expression. It's totally unique to you. And therefore, as Andrew said earlier, you may start by, being inspired by other people or modeling your work initially on somebody that you admire. But you find your own style and you find your own voice. And this is the most exciting thing that can happen to a writer. And this is success. And I would strongly recommend people trying different genres and trying different forms and modes of expression, and seeing what they like, and experimenting and finding what they, what suits them, because there's some really exciting things that can be done if you start to open your mind, in that way. So to me, success is like, is really about continuing to express yourself and finding the tools and the instruments to do it. So for example, because you're so keen to do it, you will train yourself. You will go and find ways of better expressing and, refining what you're doing. Because you're trying to do the best that you can. And it's very exciting when you feel that you're growing as a writer, that you're really, conveying something that you want, and somebody responds in a way that is so gratifying. I mean, honestly, I don't think there is a feeling as special as that in the world, because a lot of writing is quite solitary. And when somebody responds, and really gets what you're trying to do, I'm sure Andrew would agree as well. It's just really heartwarming, and it's always exciting. It never gets old.
True, I do agree. Even as an aspiring writer, when there's somebody who comments on my writing, the feeling is sort of priceless. And my final question for Fidel would be, do you have any tips for anyone who wants to start writing?
I guess just do it a lot. The ones that you hear all the time are the best ones. Read a lot, but read widely, but wisely is something that I've kind of followed in my life, where I read a huge variety of genres, but read kind of writers that are respected, that are known, that because there are a lot of books out there that aren't necessarily going to help you become or inspire you as well. So read, be discerning, but read as widely as you can. And the other thing is, there's no short. At least I haven't figured out a shortcut. You just have to put a lot of words on pages and keep going back. And I think Dr. Devika touched on this as well. When people criticize your work, be open to that criticism. Be receptive to it. It sucks at first to hear people. It feels like they're putting down your work. They don't quite get it. They're not. The temptation always is to think of someone who gives a negative review as a bad reviewer, as someone who doesn't understand it. But the more you try and open your mind to criticism, whether it's whether you're putting your article or your blog up on a website, and then someone on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, even if it's a caption up on Instagram and someone tells you that this is badly written, criticism can come from everywhere. But I think just be as open to it as you can. It sucks. It's not easy. Like especially if you've poured your heart into a piece of work. It's not going to be easy the first time you hear that, and it's not going to be easy the 100th time you hear it. But I think it's important to be open to it, and to just to consider whether that's true. Maybe what they're saying isn't going to help you become a better writer, but at least be open to the idea that maybe they're onto something. I think those were some of the things that I struggled with, but I think that a lot of getting better at writing just happens. Well, for me, it just happened from me just writing a lot. For my job, I'm lucky that at least in the early years, I was required to write a lot of copy, and just the process of honing things. It's a craft. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So I think those would be my tips.
Thank you so much. I've been frantically taking down notes, and that's all the questions that I have for both the panelists. And I would like to open up the floor for all of you who are listening. If you do have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions from any of the panelists.
While we're waiting, can I say, based on what Andrew was just saying about criticism, I've decided in Sri Lanka, based on my experience in the last few years, to not review books which I have too many negative opinions about. And that may seem like a surprising thing, but I've decided that if there's too many negatives, then it's usually because the book's been badly edited. And really, my comments should have been made before it was published. So I'm not going to embarrass a writer by writing negative reviews in the public forum. I think it's devastating to a writer for that to happen. So I will decline to review if that's the case. So all my reviews are of books that I think are really great. So I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Anyone who has questions? Okay, if nobody has any questions, I think we can wrap up.
There are a few people who have questions. Just give me a second.
Okay, sure.
Hi, Aman.
Yes, Zainab, go ahead. You can ask your question.
The thing is, I love writing, but I don't know how to start writing. I don't know which genre I love, like which section I have to choose in writing. How do I choose that? Like, how do I find my passion? In which section I want to choose, like writing, when writing something. Like, I have written short stories in my school days. Now I'm just waiting at home, so I want to do something productive. So I want to know how to choose my passion.
Dr. Devika, yes, Amana, did you have anything?
No. Go on.
Oh, well, Dr. Devika or Fidel, anybody could
Sure.
yeah.
Can I say that basically you just whatever idea that you have, you jot it down in a notebook, and then you look at it and you ask yourself, what would be the best form in which I could explore this? Would it be a poem? Would it be an article, like a short article, like a feature article? Or would it be like a blog post, or would it be a short story? And just try to visualize whatever the idea is in a form, that makes sense to you, and then go for it. It may not work as an article. It may be better as a story, but don't be afraid to try. Is what I'm trying to say, because the more diverse expressions you attempt, the more you're exploring, and you might find that what you think you can do is really not anything like a fraction of what you can do. You'll probably find that you can do a lot more and write in a lot of different styles. But also, as Andrea was saying before, read widely and have a look at what other people have done, and see, how they've been able to express certain things, and that might give you some inspiration as well. But ultimately, it's your experimentation that will result in you finding your style.
Yes, ma'am.
Fidel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly to add to that, I think probably a couple of things. I mean, first is get something on the page. Whatever idea. I mean, sometimes you want to write something, but you don't have anything. But if you have something that strikes you as an interesting thought, an interesting idea, get that on the page. It could be a 15-word sentence. It could be a 10-word sentence. And then kind of grow it out from there. It doesn't have to be the central part of your story in the end. It doesn't have to be the main thing that your story or your article or your blog post or whatever it is hangs on. But it could be a starting point. It could spark off other ideas. If you sit down and you kind of think about it, I think sometimes that helps me when I have to write a column and I'm really clueless as to what to write. I just have one thought, 10 words, get it on the page, and then just see what grows out of it. That's one kind of strategy that I've used. The other is, when you're inspired by something that you read, write as soon as possible after that, and see if you can do something that, maybe you take take what you've read and you try and write something in the same style or in the same genre. And I think almost inevitably, because you're you and everybody writes differently. Even if you're trying to emulate someone else, your writing generally, in my experience, takes on its own life. So if you read something that's really inspiring and that you really enjoy, maybe try and write something, very quickly afterwards. I think those are the kind of practical things that I could, my only practical advice that I can give to that question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think, Zainab, your question was answered perfectly, and you can go ahead and start writing. Start today. And if anybody else has any questions?
Yeah, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sure.
Hi. Thank you very much for this space. I joined a little late, but I learned something. I have a question for Andrew. Andrew, I'm a big fan of your writing on Cricinfo. What I really like, it's usually laced with a lot of sarcasm. I don't know whether everybody enjoys that sort of writing, but I love it. I want to ask, usually when, the authors of Cricinfo, when they write articles, there's a punchline at the end which sums up everything. Do you start from the punchline and work backwards, or how do you go about that?
I'm not. Yeah. Thank you, first of all. Thank you so much for the kind words. In terms of a punchline, it depends. Like every time. I can only speak for myself. I write an article. It's a different process. Sometimes I start writing from the first sentence, and the first sentence that I write it ends up being the first sentence of the article. That doesn't happen that often, but generally I just start writing with what interests me most about the piece, and then sometimes these things fall into place. If there's a punchline at the end, or if there's like a neat way to kind of like conclude the article. Sometimes, I don't really have a good answer for you on that, but because every article is different, and I don't think all of my articles have kind of a concluding sentence either. Sometimes as a writer, it's just important to know when an article is done and to get out without restating something you've said higher up. So I think, I'm sorry that's not such a good answer, but I think it's sometimes there are great finishing lines as well, and you really want to end an article, especially in like today's kind of social media age. You want to end the article with something that the reader takes with them, and if they take something with them, then the likelihood of it being shared and all that kind of stuff is higher if you end an article strongly. So I do focus on my endings as well, but they come about in completely different ways. Sometimes they're written at the start, sometimes they're written right at the end. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And anybody with questions?
Yeah, it's a quick one from me to Andrew. Again, echoing Irshad's comments, big fan of your writing, particularly the one you wrote about what's going on with Sri Lankan cricket. That actually did make me laugh, and it also made me cry. So well done to you, Andrew. Big fan. This is a funny one actually. How do I get your book up on a sleepless isle to Ireland? I couldn't find a way to get it without paying a huge price. The hard copy on Amazon, hardcover on Amazon is like 40 quid or something. So that's one question. A second question, because I'm far away, removed from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is current ongoings and upcoming writers and so on. What are a couple of names that you would recommend to start with understanding the Sri Lankan writing landscape? I'm not a big writer. I don't have much of an inspiration or aspiration to become a writer, but I do like reading, and I do like reading stuff that's closer to home being Sri Lanka, but I've been living in Ireland for the last 20 years.
Yeah, thank you again for your kind words on the writing. As to how to get my book, I think Barefoot probably ships internationally. I think Pereira Hussein also ships internationally. If they don't work out, just tweet me and I'll get back to you. I think, and there is a way also to get it on Kindle from anywhere in the world, but there's a little bit of a process. But just send me a tweet. I'll let you know. On the other stuff, I think maybe Dr. Devika can help me out as well. I'll tell you kind of three writers who I really enjoy, in Sri Lanka. One is Anukar Aruthagasam, who's just been longlisted for the Booker Prize. His latest one, I haven't read his second book, but Story of a Brief Marriage, his first book, was incredible. It's kind of a demanding read, but a really, really rewarding one. And Naomi Munawira, who's written two books, Island of a Thousand Mirrors, and what was the second one called? What Lies Between Us, I think is the second one. Both fantastic. Island of a Thousand Mirrors especially was one that I really enjoyed. And then there are all sorts of writers. I mean, we just had Kanya Dalmeida win the Commonwealth Writers' Prize with her fantastic short story that's definitely worth searching out. And it's a shortish kind of 20-minute read. and Udanje with it, Vijay Ratna from is doing some great sci-fi work from Sri Lanka. Though his stories aren't always particularly Sri Lanka based, but it's definitely worth reading and fantastic nonetheless. I think Dr. Devika, would you have any other recommendations?
Well, I think that there's a lot of really great writers in Sri Lanka. The ones that you've mentioned, apart from Yudhanjaya, are, as far as I know, they're writers who are writing in other countries. So they, even people like Michael Ondaatje and people like that are often living in Canada or Australia or America, whereas he is a local Sri Lankan person, and that's significant, I think. The local people that I've been observing are bloggers at the moment, but I'm really hoping they're going to start writing full-length novels. Adila Ismail is one of my favorite writers. I love her writing. It's really elegant. It's really precise. You can see how she's thinking. It's always interesting. Raisa Wickramatunga also is really good. You can see that a lot of them are journalists. And Amalini Disera, also very good. All very different from each other, and all women, but very, very, articulate, writing about things, as you say, from a specific lens, which is not usually looked at. And I find them really interesting. I'm hoping that they will be able to write, full-length books in the future.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Devika. Yeah, Andrew, I didn't get the names properly, but I'll tweet you. Perhaps you could write it up, write up a tweet for me as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll send you a message.
Yes, anybody else with questions? I think we have time for one question.
There was a question from Jeevani. I think I have to give her the access, but she hasn't requested to speak.
Okay.
But she had sent a DM, so hold on.
Okay. Amana, if you do have access to the question, maybe you could read it out.
Yeah, I don't have access to the question. Hold on, we have another question actually.
Okay.
Mr. Anand, you had a question? You had requested to speak.
Thank you very much. Andrew, just like a lot of people here, I'm also a big fan of your writing. I also write quite a lot, but of course at a very, very totally mundane level. So, we look up to you. I just, one question to you, Andrew, with the trend now of paywalls everywhere to quality writing, and fact is that a lot of us obviously cannot subscribe to work by, for example, someone like Gideon Hay. What do you make of that trend? Of course, there are commercial considerations, but doesn't that also take away from the ability of quality writing to reach a broader spectrum of audiences?
Thank you again. I'm sure that's not true about your writing being mundane. I don't think any writing is that mundane. But on paywalls, this is a really good question because it's one that as a journalist you're constantly you're constantly considering this kind of this conflict between money and income, or like what sustains good journalism, and the number of people who are able to read your pieces. So I've had friends, journalist friends. Thankfully, everything on Cricinfo is still free, but I've had friends make the switch from free websites or from being from free publications to paywall publications, and find that although they've made the switch and maybe they have slightly better paying jobs because the paywall model seems to be working to some extent, they are still not getting as much satisfaction out of it because not as many people are able to engage with their work. And I think for me, to some extent, it's a deal breaker to not have people be able, have easy access to the work that I kind of do. Because I don't think like my motivation has ever been to make loads of money from writing, but then also the other side of it is for many publications, staying free, the kind of the ad-based model is not something that funds good journalism. And I think we've seen this with various websites where they become more and more clickbaity. Cricinfo constantly has these arguments where, like, how much do we chase the clicks and how much do we value good journalism? And thankfully, I think we're still striking a pretty good balance, but it's increasingly becoming difficult to strike that balance for publications. My preference always will be for my work to be as accessible to as many people as possible. So for me to go to a paywalled kind of system, I think a lot would have to change. But then someone like Gideon has written so many books. There's such a wealth of his writing out on the web that it probably doesn't matter so much to someone like him. But yeah, I wish this kind of the Guardian model, which where websites kind of ask their readers for a donation, and which seems to sort of be working for them, and they maintain their kind of editorial journalistic integrity, and their top writers are still featured high up, and they don't seem to be so driven by clicks. I hope that that's a model that finds success going forward, because that one kind of manages to balance both things, being able to pay for their journalists and to pay for their writers, and also for their work to be viewed and read widely. So yeah, I think my preference will always be for that.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I get a follow-up question? I'm asking the host. Can I get one more question, please?
Yeah, I think you can go ahead.
Thank you. So, Andrew, just quickly on, you've seen a lot of turmoil in Sri Lankan cricket, and all of us suffer from it. But also now what's happening in Australia with the board coming firmly behind Justin, while the team apparently, and there are a lot of murmurs, and some of the reports coming out of his den and all of that suggest that things are not hale and hearty within the team with Justin at the helm. How much do you think is that kind of a thing sustainable at the top levels of cricket when you want the team to function as a great unit?
Yeah, I don't really know that much about the inside kind of scoop on that situation. I think sometimes in sport, I'll keep this answer short, by the way. I think sometimes in sports, adversarial relationships can work. And not just in sports, but even in kind of like newsrooms. People not liking each other is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as they are kind of united behind one objective. I don't think I wouldn't say it's unsustainable, but there's so many permutations there that I'm not aware of. So I couldn't really give an in-depth answer to that question.
Thank you.
I've been told that we have 2 more questions left. If anybody wants to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Mr. Gautam had a question. I've given him
Hi.
mic access.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Hi.
We can hear you.
First of all, thanks for the space. Andrew, great to listen to you. A big fan of your writing. So my question to you is, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times, is with social media kind of bringing the players directly in contact with the fans, and a lot of players themselves either sharing a lot of details, or someone like Ashwin, even conducting interviews with members of the support staff like he did. How does that now change the landscape for a budding journalist, not someone like you who's an established superstar, in terms of what's going to happen in the future? Not to mention the fact that boards like the BCCI have virtually put up a Great Wall of China between players and the media. And then a follow-up quick question is, do you see cricket going the club model like soccer, with leagues like the IPL basically becoming the forefront of international cricket, and teams taking a backseat? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer the first one. It's a fascinating landscape with social media where players are now interviewing each other and kind of cutting out the. I thought Ashwin's YouTube channel was fantastic, by the way. He was a really good interviewer and wasn't afraid to get into difficult kind of areas with his interviewees, some of whom were still people who are playing the game. And I think the problem with stuff like that is that players who have this great platform, who are followed by so many people, but don't necessarily have the journalistic training, aren't necessarily kind of guided by journalistic ethics. I'm a big fan of the Ashwin channel, so I think he's doing okay, and he does his interviews were like very much enjoyed. But there is the once you cut journalists out, there is kind of a possibility that pandering can happen, and it's not necessarily a robust or a kind of enlightening interview. Sometimes when in those kinds of situations, it's kind of a softball interview. So yeah, that's what I would say to that. But social media continues to change. I think in a few years' time we'll be in a wholly different media environment again. So I guess we'll keep watching that. In terms of the clubs, and I think that's been happening for a while. I think more and more franchise. I'm not sure we'll move to an entirely franchise system, but I think it's almost inevitable that franchise cricket will take bigger and bigger chunks out of the schedule, and we'll be watching more and more of that as opposed to international cricket, which has not been profitable for a lot of teams for a while.
Okay, I think we do have another space idea that kind of came up right now. I think Andrew Fidel could do a separate space on cricket and for all the cricket fans out here. But if anybody has one last question on writing, go take it. Anybody? Okay, so I did right now, and this will be the last question. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. What was the question?
Media and writing intersects. Is there the changes that writers need to do in order to suit their content into social media, into the social media template?
Sure. Well, I think firstly, a lot of publishers these days won't even consider taking on a new author. Andrew could probably talk about this too, unless they have a really strong social media following. So it's a really good idea to start building your recognition through social media and get people familiar with your writing in a number of ways, so that you can, I don't know, have how many thousand people on your platforms, and it'll be easier for the publishing company to market you. There's that. The unfortunate part about social media and writing is that quite a lot of people spend way too much time performing on social media rather than writing. And a lot of Instagram stuff and a lot of sort of self-referential stuff, and some of it is really, in my view, kind of detracting from the work they're doing. But anyway, that's the nature of the world that we're living in. There's also a focus on celebrity writing. We saw that a lot with the GLF when it was on, and people were focusing on external aspects of writing from my point of view rather than on the quality of the work. So that's another problem that people have. But it's the intersection of marketing and producing written work that it can be really great, but it's a challenge to the writer to keep it, really what they want it to be and not get taken up with the external aspects of it, I think.
Thank you very much. Fidel, do you have anything to add to it?
Just I'll keep it short, but I'm kind of very hesitant to, social media. I think Dr. Devika said it perfectly. Sometimes it can become such a big distraction that it really you're chasing retweets and likes and shares over doing honest, authentic, original, creative work, and I think you can fall into that trap. And I don't think that chasing, it does help, I think, to have a social media profile. I hope that when, the decision was made to publish my book, that it did really come into it. I hope that, my writing and everybody's writing can stand on its own feet without any kind of influence on how marketable it is on social media. I think those concerns have always been there, just in a different form. But in social media, in the age of social media, they're much more in your face and much more direct. But I tend to see social media as something that I can use to connect people with my work, rather than trying to grow social media for its own reasons. I try to think of it as, if I have a platform, if I tweet it out, then more people will read it, more people will connect with it, then that's great. But beyond that, I try to kind of keep my writing life separate, and I don't judge the success of my pieces based on how many tweets or retweets they get, although that it can become very, very tempting to do that. I try and do it just, if I feel like I've written something, if someone who I really respect, a writer I really respect, or a reader I really respect, will come back and say, hey, this is what I liked about it. This is, or will tell me that they connected with it. That means a lot more to me than, like an extra share or whatever, or an extra like. I think, you're trying to, I guess I just see it as like a way to connect with readers, and I try not to be distracted by it.
Thank you very much for those two interesting perspectives. Yes,
we have another question from MJ. He requested that if he can have one more question.
MJ, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I would like to pose this to Dr. Devika. Dr. Devika, you mentioned about writing poetry, especially when it comes to poetry, through prompts. And we all know that there are different styles in writing poetry. So like when you get the prompt and when you go into, when you start writing, do you actually have a specific style in mind, or just does it flow like completely random?
Well, at first, when we first started, I was not familiar with this idea of just writing to a cue, but once you get into it, you find that the image or the idea will find its own shape. You don't have to strategize it or make a choice. You just start writing. So, for example, last week, the prompt was a poem by another poet, and the word was waiting. So I immediately thought of it, which was my father passed away 2 months ago, and I remembered waiting by his bedside, and that's what the poem was about. I hadn't been able to write poetry about that event until that moment, and in my mind I suddenly remembered a long time ago I had been climbing a mountain, and this is how poetry works actually, just through imagery. It might seem completely unrelated, but the poem somehow brought together basically the way that mountain was designed, or maybe human beings had added onto it, but they had created a pathway. I mean, it was a rock face, but there was a fence thing that you had handrails. But the handrail section ended just before the most difficult part of the mountain. And I remember thinking, this was years ago, I remember thinking, why? Why does it stop right here, just when we need it most? And that idea was what I was able to bring into the poem. It's just to do with association of ideas and kind of letting and practice. At the moment, it is flowing. It's a bit like doing individual poses and individual, and then after a while, your creativity takes over, and you can build them into a sequence. So it seems, anyway.
Thank you very much. And it's unfortunate that we have to end or wrap up the space right now, because I do get that we do have a lot more questions coming in, but hopefully we'll have another session similar to this and get your questions answered. And I would like to, today we had two amazing writers. One of them, Fidel, who didn't see himself becoming a writer when he was young, and then we had Dr. Devika, who always wanted to be a writer, and today both of them very successful writers that we look up to. And thank you very much for giving us your time and all the information and inspiration that we needed. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you very much for participating and making this space interactive. And finally, I would like to thank Chocolat Magazine for giving me this chance to moderate these amazing authors. Thank you, everyone. Keep writing. Good night and stay safe.